A very good evening. My name is Henry Mugenyi. Joining me this evening is Dr. Moses Mulumba, and today we decided to interest ourselves in vaccine manufacturing in Africa. Talking about vaccine manufacturing in Africa, where are we currently and what obstacles have really hindered us from achieving what we anticipate to achieve?
We've remained a big reliant on the outside countries for pharmaceuticals generally, before we even talk about vaccines. I think the continent continues to import almost 70 to 80% of the pharmaceuticals that it needs. When it comes to vaccines, we imported almost 99% of the vaccines that we need on the continent. Part of the problem is that we've not invested sufficiently in pharmaceutical manufacturing. And if you're to invest in pharmaceutical manufacturing, there are critical areas that you need to invest in. One of them is research and development. Research and development is very critical because medical products that we are talking about are a result of innovations. So if you don't see public investment in research and development in universities, in hospitals, then it becomes a problem. And I'm talking about public investment. Even the research and development that we've seen has been by the private sector. So the moment the private sector recoups the profit, then you stop complaining about the expenses of people face on pharmaceuticals. The other area is political commitment and more coordination. I think we need to move away from just the rhetoric of talk of pharmaceuticals and just making it fashionable to make it an issue that is beyond health. It's a political issue. It's an issue of sustainability. If we cannot provide the medicines that we need in our countries, we cannot sustain our countries.
We have about 375 pharmaceuticals all over Africa. What have been our success stories so far?
Some of the success stories, I think, have been mostly in policies. I think as a continent, we've invested in policies really heavily. From a pharmaceutical manufacturing plan for Africa, which the African Union set some time ago, to a model law that is regulating pharmaceuticals, to policies that now are talking about PAVAM and AVAT on vaccines specifically. The continent expresses the desires in its own policy frameworks. But we see that the actual manufacturing and the successes that you would be talking about are in the usual countries that are moving beyond low developed to actually developing countries. In South Africa, in the northern part of the continent, where if you talk about statistics of the existence of this pharmaceutical industry, that's where they are concentrated. So in many of the sub-Saharan countries where we actually have the biggest disease need, biggest disease burden and the need for pharmaceuticals, we've not seen that success that is happening. Pharmaceutical manufacturing is about industrialization. If you do not support the road infrastructure as industrialization requires, if you do not have capital that is reachable by people and people still compete on commercial rates to have capital to set up, it's going to be very, very difficult for us to do it.
Brands like Afya na Haki have really come out strong to talk about or to advocate for vaccine manufacturing and pharmaceutical on the African region. How basic are you collaborating with private sector, governments, and different universities for us to achieve the Agenda of 2040?
I think the first realization is that Africa is not limping because historically it has been limping. That's not the case. I think if you look at the history of pharmaceutical manufacturing and discoveries, the rest of the world has been stealing from African pharmaceuticals. The stories in South Africa where indigenous knowledge has been stolen. The stories of here where basic things that we have that would lead to pharmaceutical manufacturing are being taken out of the countries to go to the West, have been quite predominant on the continent. The challenge has been that how do we move our resources that we have indigenously? How do we move them towards industrialization? And this is very, very important, such that we do not talk about concoctions as usual. We move the herbal and be able to develop the industry sufficiently. But the other thing is that there are things like regulations, which are very important. Pharmaceutical manufacturing is also about regulation. How much are we empowering our regulatory agencies to not just be policemen that monitor compliance, but be parties that promote local pharmaceutical manufacturing? And they encourage little innovations rather than arresting people who are trying to innovate, as we saw in COVID-19. encourage them to come and submit some of these ideas and see how things can be done. So I think it's a regulatory issue that we need to work on, it's an investment issue that we need to work on, but also the political decision that I mentioned before, that's very important.
The president has come out on several occasions to pronounce himself about the support for sciences and the production of vaccine and pharmaceuticals in our country. Are they not enough yet?
I think that what we've seen the president do is do pronouncements, but not the commitment. The president can make beautiful speeches, but if these are not followed up by Minister of Finance to invest money, if they are not followed up by really supporting our scientists more sufficiently, it can be fashionable, it can be something that we talk about in the policy, we can even pass so many policies around it, but if we don't invest in it as a political decision, it's going to be very difficult for us to realize it. And that's what I have seen, that the commitment in terms of talk is there everywhere. But the commitment in terms of actual investment, we don't see it.
Thank you very much, Dr. Moses Mulumba. Africa scaling up from the current less than 30% of the vaccines and pharmaceuticals that we produce is very essential for us to better our healthcare systems. Back to you at the Political Command Center. My name is Henry Mugenyi.